Welcome to Starbound Second Channel. My name is Systolic and I will be your narrator today. But before we get into today's story, please check down below to see if you're subscribed. It's 100% free and it just allows our stories to pop up more in your feed. 3 centuries to perfect warp travel. 5 generations to establish their first colony. 8 decades to develop reliable FTL communications. And now these humans, those primitive beings, were building starships by the hundreds in the time it took Kratos' people to design a single engine component. Through a transparent orb he held, the Emperor watched their vessels move around the miniature Earth, their movements reflected in his dark eyes, deep set within pronounced bone sockets. The transparent orb held in his attendant's elongated fingers showed every detail of the human's vessels with perfect clarity. His own skeletal fingers traced patterns in the transparent orb's surface, tracking their trajectories, the subtle whispers of bone against bone, the only sound in the vast circular chamber. The imperial palace of Morgar rose around him like a temple to power. Thick load-bearing columns of polished stone stretched upwards into darkness, their surfaces hidden thanks to weak light that filtered through tall windows. Ancient tapestries depicting their first ventures into space hung between the columns, their colours muted, but their meaning eternal. The floor beneath their feet bore intricate patterns that told the story of Morgarian space exploration, each line and curve carved with techniques that no longer existed. In alcoves along the walls, the preserved remains of past emperors sat in states of eternal contemplation, their empty eye sockets forever fixed on the proceedings below. Like all Morgarians, Kratos' appearance might have terrified lesser species. His jaw featured a bare skull-like structure, with living tissue visible only in the eye sockets and around the jaw. His ribcage and joint structures were external, creating a naturally armoured appearance that made him seem both regal and dangerous. Soft organs and living tissue lay protected within bone cavities. To them, this was an undeniable proof of their species' evolutionary perfection. In mere decades, they've achieved what took us centuries. His voice resonated within his bone chamber, containing wonder and unease. The words echoed off the polished stone columns that supported the ceiling high above, reaching the diverse group of Morgarians before him. Chief Scientist Marak stepped forward, joints creaking as he browed.
With respect, Your Majesty, that's an oversimplification.
The scientist's exposed bone structure caught the strange atmospheric light filtering through the chamber's tall windows.
Their artificial intelligence systems process vast amounts of data simultaneously. We develop our theories through careful, methodical research. Their speed comes at the cost of sloppy understanding.
Kratos shifted his posture, acknowledging the point while maintaining his rigid stance upon the throne carved from a single piece of ancient meteorite. Scientific advisor Sital approached the throne, his armor-like exoskeleton casting long shadows across the floor as he approached with data streams from the central processing intelligence. The orb-bearer's skeletal fingers moved nervously, rotating the sphere to show another view of Earth's advancement. Kratos rose from his throne, extending his bone fingers towards the orb. The first primitive rockets to orbital stations in less than a century. Unheard of. The words carried the weight of centuries, resonating through his bone chamber with concern. Hamo, the historical keeper, rustled forward, bone joints ridging with age and authority. Primitive is what you should focus on, Your Majesty. Their early vessels were death traps. Half their initial attempts ended in spectacular failures. Before the Emperor could reply, the council members formed a circle around the central ceremonial pit, their movements creating a spot of subtle creaks and whispers. Military advisor Votak presented a series of transparent orbs, each displaying different aspects of human military capability. A brass and mechanical model materialized, demonstrating humanity's multiple theoretical approaches to faster-than-light travel compared to the Morgarians' single, perfect method. Votak drew himself to full height, his bone plate shifting with the movement.
The humans won't be content with their solar system for long. Our projections give us less than 1,000 years before they achieve multi-system exploration capabilities.
Kratos traced the edge of the pit with a single elongated finger, his gaze fixed on the shifting images below. Hovering observation orbs captured every moment, their surfaces filled with real-time data streams. The eternal dark sky beyond the windows occasionally lit with strange phenomena, casting shadows across the assembled council. 3 advisors stepped forward, each holding an orb containing their proposed solution. The military commander presented scenes of fleet movements and strategic strikes. The diplomatic council used his orb to show images of closed borders and severed trade routes. The intelligence director summoned schematics of sabotage operations. Before any could speak, Kratos rose, his hand cutting through the air in a single, sharp motion. All 3 orbs exploded into transparent dust, scattering across the floor. His silence filled the chamber, heavier than any word. None of these solutions were worthy of consideration. He turned to his personal orb keeper, who approached with slow steps. Within the Master Sphere's depths, the image of a massive ship took shape, its scale dwarfing anything in their historical records. Kratos' voice carried the weight of centuries as he outlined his vision. "We've spent centuries perfecting our first warp ship. Let us spend 3 generations building something truly unprecedented." The council members gathered around the orb, their skull-like faces reflected in its surface, eyes gleaming with ancient pride. "Let humanity build their hundreds of ships," Kratos continued, placing his bone-plated hand upon the orb. Dark energy rippled through the sphere, broadcasting his decision to all corners of the planet. "We shall build one that will make the galaxy remember our greatness, something the Galactic Council has forgotten." The air grew heavy with unspoken consequences as the advisors stood transfixed by the image rotating within the orb. In the alcoves lining the chamber walls, the preserved remains of past emperors seemed to watch in eternal contemplation, silent witnesses to a decision that would shape the destiny of their species. Kratos' dark eyes remained fixed on the ship's schematics, his bone face rigid with determination. The humans' rapid advancement had forced his hand, but in doing so, they had given him the opportunity to restore the Morgarians to their rightful place in the galaxy. Let the younger race rush headlong into the cosmos. His people would show them the true meaning of patience, union, and power. The Foundation's Dawn, Year 1. 30 days after the council meeting, the construction site stretched beyond the visible horizon, strange atmospheric lights dancing across the perfectly leveled ground. Emperor Kratos stood with his son, Umato, their bone structures casting long shadows in the work lights. At 40 years old, young for their species that lived for 2 centuries, Umato watched intently as massive hull segments were positioned by armies of workers moving like bone-white ants across the vast expanse. "Just 30 days ago, this was barren ground," Kratos said from their makeshift Imperial pavilion. "Now we begin our century-long task." His voice carried both pride and gravity as he gestured towards the framework rising from the dark soil of Mogar. Zetal approached with progress reports written in ancient scrolls, the subtle grinding of their joints barely audible over the sound of construction. Behind them, workers positioned the first massive hull segments with methodical precision. Military advisor Votak materialized from the shadows, his bone plates reflecting the strange lights above. "The mining operations on our colony worlds have been doubled, Emperor," Votak reported. "Every resource now flows to this single purpose." Kratos placed his bone-plated hand on Umato's shoulder. "Remember, son, this ship is more than metal and power. It is the future of our species. You will oversee its progression for the next century after I am gone." Umato watched intently as massive energy conduits were positioned. "I understand, Father. The next 100 years of construction will be my burden to bear." The legacy continues, year 102. A century had transformed the construction site beyond recognition. Kratos had been dead for 55 years, his preserved body joining the other emperors in the palace alcoves. Umato, now 142 years old, had ruled for nearly a century. The ship, originally planned as a 300-year project, had reached its halfway point slightly ahead of schedule. The half-built vessel dominated the horizon like a metallic mountain range, its partially completed hull sections rising kilometers into the perpetually dark sky. Construction platforms at different levels created a three-dimensional maze of activity, crews working at all heights simultaneously. The exposed framework revealed internal chambers large enough to house entire cities, some still skeletal, others nearly complete after decades of work. Umato addressed the gathered clan leaders, his voice carrying across the vast construction yard. "A century ago, my father laid the first foundation. Now, as we enter the second century of construction, I see not just progress in metal and bone, but in spirit." The clan representatives stood arranged by their ancient houses, yet their positioning told a new story. The mountain clans stood shoulder to shoulder with the valley houses, ancient feuds forgotten. The orbital families shared resources with the deep core miners, centuries of isolation transformed into cooperation. "We who once fought over resources," a clan leader said, "have spent centuries learning to share them freely for this great work, to regain our rightful place among the stars." The culmination, year 298. The dark sky remained unchanged, but the ground below had been transformed through 298 years of continuous work. Emperor Haruto, now approaching his first decade as emperor at the age 128, stood where his grandfather had first blessed the ground. Trees planted during Kratos' time towered over gathering spaces where the grandchildren of the original workers now served as master craftsmen. Worn paths between cities and construction sites had become permanent roads, each bearing the architectural marks of different eras. The vessel stood complete after 298 years of continuous construction, its surface integrating Morgarian architectural elements from all three eras. Its size made even the surrounding cities that had grown to support it look insignificant, a visual representation to 3 centuries of unwavering purpose of a species. Somewhere else, Emperor Haruto's image was projected onto a giant screen before millions, his amplified voice carrying across the assembly. 200 years ago, my grandfather recognized humanity's potential threats. A century later, my father united our people with a shared purpose. Today, we stand ready, not just to defend our place in the galaxy, but to remind humanity and all others why the Morgarians were once feared. The crowds responded with unified approval, bone structures creating a cascading wave of hollow echoes that resonated across the gathering. "For Morgar! For glory!" Haruto raised the ancient bone staff, its surface etched with the history of their species. "We let humans build their fleets of lesser ships. We have spent 3 centuries building the instrument of their humbling and our resurgence. The time has come!" The assembled masses moved as one, their bone structures creating a strange symphony that echoed across the gathering grounds. Above them, their creation caught the strange lights of Morgar's atmosphere, no longer a construction project, but a manifestation of their species' greatest achievement, and perhaps their greatest folly. The celebration continued long into Morgar's night, the bone staff raised high above the crowds. But Haruto had already turned his thoughts to their true purpose. Moving towards his royal hover, he made his way to the enormous ship, where a row of guards awaited him, bowing before escorting him to the bridge, where his imperial seat awaited. From the command throne, watching the launch site transform from construction area to history through the ship's sensors, he felt the weight of 3 centuries settle into his bone structure. A single command and the ground trembled beneath the gathered millions as they celebrated, their unified purpose about to be tested against the reality of combat. Their vessel rose against the dark sky like a new celestial body, its bone pattern hull catching the strange atmospheric light one final time before breaking free of Morgar's gravity. Each plate and component represented a piece of their history, his grandfather's foundation, his father's expansion, and his own completion. The ship moved with a grace that belied its enormous size, every system operating with the accuracy that only centuries of refinement could achieve. Haruto watched the final imagery of their homeworld fade from the view screens. Then, hours later, turned his attention to their first target. The human colony rotated peacefully below its gas giant parent, habitation domes glowing softly in the reflected light of the planet's rings. 3 patrol ships and 1 larger vessel maintained their routine orbits, their crew unaware of the judgment about to be descended upon them. The colony had entered its night cycle, most inhabitants sleeping as Haruto's vessel emerged from warp, like an eclipse shadow over the moon.
Incoming transmission from the human command,
his communications officer reported, bone fingers moving quickly across his new yet ancient control surface.
They're requesting identification.
Haruto rose from the command throne, his movement creating a cascade of hollow whispers. The bridge crew worked in perfect synchronization, their bone plates creating a subtle symphony of clicks and whisper that had been rehearsed for decades. Each station represented generations of specialized training, weapon systems perfected through centuries of theoretical modeling, shield harmonics tuned to frequencies discovered through years of patient research. Target their primary defense vessel first, Haruto commanded, watching the tactical display where each human ship was marked with measurements calculated to achieve previously impossible accuracy. Sequence 17. The weapons officer's elongated fingers reached for the controls that had been shaped by 3 generations of craftsmen, energy built in chambers that had taken 50 years to forge, focusing through crystals grown over decades. The beam that emerged was nearly invisible, the product of countless refinements that had occupied entire lifetimes of research. The human vessel never had a chance to raise its shields. One moment it was there, the next it simply ceased to exist. Its atomic structure disrupted with surgical precision. The patrol ships reacted with what their kind would consider admiral speed, breaking formation and accelerating on randomized vectors. Haruto watched their desperate maneuvers with detached interest. "Counting," he said softly. The tactical officer's bone structure creaked in acknowledgement. 1. The first patrol ship vanished in a flash that reflected off the gas giant's rings. 2. The second tried to dive behind one of the colony's orbital platforms. Both were erased with the same shot. 3. The final patrol ship managed to launch what their sensors identified as a distress beacon before it too was eliminated with mechanical precision. The colony below had finally realized their peril, but Haruto just ignored them and studied the readouts streaming across his command displays, each showing the work of centuries being proven in combat. "Methodical," he reminded his weapons officer, "as we plan. Beginning with their power generation facilities." The colony's infrastructure crumbled in exactly the sequence their simulations had predicted. First the power cores. Their containment fields collapsed with precise application of force. Then the atmospheric processors. Carefully calculated shots turning them to vapor. The habitation domes themselves were last, their emergency shields failing one by one against weapons that had been designed specifically to overcome them. Debris spiraled towards the gas giant below, creating patterns that seemed almost artistic against the massive planet's swirling atmosphere. The colony's final moments played out exactly as countless simulations had predicted. No rescue ships could reach them in time. No desperate measures could save them from weapons that had been perfected through generations of development. "Record everything," Haruto commanded as the last dome collapsed. "Every measurement, every reaction. 3 centuries of theory are finally being validated. Let our descendants study how reality matched our predictions." The bridge crew worked with the same speed they had shown throughout the attack, their bone structures creating complex shadows in the light of the burning colony below. Each movement, each action, represented not just training, but inherited knowledge, passed down through generations of dedicated preparation. "Set course for home," he commanded, his voice showing the happiness of a fulfilled purpose. "Let them find this. Let them understand what 3 centuries of dedication can achieve, and let them tell the tales of this to the whole galaxy. They must know This is only the beginning. The massive vehicle turned with impossible grace, its systems screaming with power that had been refined through countless iterations. Behind them, the remains of the colony continued toward the gas giant's atmosphere, a definitive proof of the patience of ages unleashed in a single, devastating demonstration. The celebration lasted 7 days, ancient victory banners streaming from every tower in the capital. Haruto had given his speech from the palace balcony, his image projected as a towering hologram above the delirious crowds. The bone staff of authority glowed with inner light as he proclaimed their return to galactic prominence, each word punctuated by waves of clicking bone plates of the assembled masses below. Later, he returned to the central ceremonial pit where his grandfather had first revealed their great plan. The chamber felt different now, charged with the energy of recent victory. His advisors formed a circle around the pit, their bone structures cascading complex shadows in the light of floating observation orbs.
The colony's deconstruction exceeded our expectations,
the new science advisor said, manipulating a transparent orb that showed their attack from multiple angles.
Every weapon performed precisely as 3 centuries of theory predicted. The human shields failed exactly as our models suggested they would.
Military advisor Kalen stepped forward, joints creaking with authority. The Mars colonies will be next. Their orbital platforms are more heavily defended, but nothing they possess can stand against weapons perfected through generations of development.
Their response time was noteworthy,
Intelligence Director Misa added, her bone fingers dancing through data streams.
Ships were dispatched within hours of the colony's deconstruction, but even their fastest can't follow us here. By then, we'll have struck again.
Haruto moved to the pit's edge, watching the tactical projections dance in its depths. Show me the Jupiter Defense Network after the attack. Multiple orbs descended, each displaying different aspects of their next target. The gas giant's massive form rotated in miniature, its moons marked with the human settlements and defensive installations. They've already begun evacuating the surviving colonies, Kalen reported, satisfaction evident in the clicking of his bone plates. Fear spreads faster than their ships can travel. Let them run, Haruto said, his voice carrying the same resonant quality his grandfather had in this very chamber. Let them tell the tales of the return of our kind to the very apex of the galaxy. Each colony we destroy will be another stepstone in the eyes of the Council. The strategic advisor, an elder whose bone structure bore the marks of centuries, moved to the opposite side of the pit. They will expect us to strike quickly, while fear of our first strike is still fresh. It would be logical. And so we shall, Haruto confirmed, raising a hand to catch a floating orb. Within its depths, their vessel's schematics rotated, showing all systems at optimal performance. A younger advisor, one of the few who had dared to question their approach centuries ago, spoke from the shadows.
But surely they will have studied the remains of the colony. The engineers are known for their quick.
Haruto cut him off, the word sharp with disdain. Always quick. Quick to build, quick to expand, quick to claim victories. But what do they truly understand? Their ships are built by machines they barely comprehend. Their colonies rise without proper foundation. Even some of their weapons are borrowed from older races, modified without true mastery. He gestured at the tactical displays, at the carefully plotted course that would take them to Jupiter again. We spent 3 centuries building our vessel for a reason. They bowed in agreement, bone plates clicking in approval. Through the windows, Haruto could see the crowd still celebrating in the streets below. 7 days of victory ceremonies had only strengthened their conviction. Prepare for departure, he commanded. Tomorrow, A sudden commotion at the chamber's entrance interrupted his words. A sensor officer burst in, their bone structure trembling with urgency. Emperor! Multiple distortions detected at the edge of our system! Haruto turned to the tactical displays, watching as impossible readings resolved themselves into perfect, horrifying shapes. Ships materialized from warped space, each one an exact replica of their own vessel, down to the distinctive bone pattern hull that had taken generations to perfect.
Some kind of illusion?
Someone immediately suggested. But Haruto knew, in that moment, something was not right. The reports flooded in faster than their communication systems could process. Not just one fleet of identical ships, but dozens, appearing simultaneously across their territory. Each human vessel was a perfect copy of their own, down to the bone pattern hull design that had taken generations to perfect. Mining outpost in the Krell system destroyed, a communications officer reported, their bone fingers trembling. Shipyards at Vorax, gone. The orbital factories around. It shouldn't, Haruto whispered, but the tactical orb told a different story. Red markers appeared and vanished across their empire as centuries of infrastructure crumbled in minutes. 300 years of careful expansion undone by weapons they had designed, wielded by ships they had somehow taught the humans to build, and at a scale and time frame that shouldn't be possible. Through the windows of the Imperial Palace's central chamber, he could see their own vessel still docked at the ceremonial landing pad, its form no longer unique and suddenly outnumbered, a relic of their arrogance, outmatched by its own targets. How long, he wondered, watching another cluster of red markers fade from the display. How long have they been watching us? That was the only possible explanation. Studying every detail, every innovation we were so proudly developing. The answer was not clear, but perhaps they had spent 3 centuries providing the humans with that perfect blueprint, a lesson in technology they had mistaken for their own secret advantage. Emperor! The military advisor's voice cracked with urgency. A larger fleet approaches Morgard directly. Hundreds of vessels, all identical to. The words died in their throat as the tactical display updated, showing the true scale of what was coming. Haruto felt the weight of history settling into his bone structure. Not just the 3 centuries they had spent building their ship, but the countless generations before that, each adding to the foundation of their supposed superiority, all of it leading to this moment of absolute clarity and absolute horror. In the streets below, the celebration continued. His people couldn't comprehend what was happening, not informed that their greatest achievement had become the instrument of their downfall. He heard their chants, their bone plates clicking in defiant tones. Victory! Glory to Morgar! But in the privacy of his own thoughts, Haruto finally understood. They had spent 3 centuries proving themselves obsolete. While they had focused on building one perfect vessel, humanity had found a way to duplicate centuries of work at a scale they simply couldn't comprehend. The defense fleet is mobilizing, someone reported, but Haruto barely heard them. His dark eyes were fixed on the tactical orb, watching the human armada approach with the same maneuvers they had spent generations developing. Their own tactics, their own technology. A transmission cut through their communications network, broadcasting simultaneously across every frequency. The humanity commander's words struck deeper than any weapon could have. Not an evil emperor leading his oblivious people to Earth, to a lost battle, but a whole planet of proud fools who gathered together for centuries hoping to destroy us. What a disappointment. The central chamber fell silent except for the subtle grinding of bone as his advisors struggled to process their new reality. Through the windows, the dark sky seemed to press down upon them with unprecedented weight. The preserved remains of past emperors watched from their alcoves, their empty eye sockets bearing witness to the end of everything they had built. Haruto stood, motionless, understanding at last that even if he wanted to surrender, his people would never accept it. They had spent too long believing in their approach, in their superiority. The crowds on the streets refusing to evacuate was proof of that. They were unable to comprehend that their greatest achievement had become their biggest vulnerability. The human fleet drew closer, their weapons charged with power drawn from systems the Morgarians had spent centuries perfecting. And in that moment, as alerts blared and his people prepared for a battle they couldn't win, Haruto felt the last pieces of their ancient pride crumbling like the bones of long-dead emperors. Even the Imperial Palace's central chamber felt different now, heavy with the weight of impending doom. The processional of orb-bearers entering through the ancient doors moved with none of their usual ceremony, their bone structures creating discordant sounds of fear rather than dignity. Above them, the preserved remains of past emperors watched from their alcoves, silent witnesses to what 3 centuries of pride have wrought. Each orb-bearer took their position, forming a circle around Haruto. Their spheres showed different scenes of methodical destruction. He moved from orb to orb, his shoulders growing heavier with each step, one showing their shipyards at Vorax crumbling under precise strikes, another displaying their mining outpost in the Krell system in flames. A third captured the moment their greatest space dock, built over 2 centuries, simply ceased to exist. His advisors watched with varying degrees of desperate denial, one gripping his staff until his bone-plated fingers scraped against each other, creating a sound like distant thunder. Another paced, each step a hollow echo of dread across the ancient floor. A third stood perfectly still, eye sockets dark with horror as they watched centuries of work undone in hours. "There must be an explanation," the science advisor said, his voice carrying none of its usual authority. "The manufacturing can't have evolved beyond our understanding. Perhaps they developed some form of matter replication we never considered? 3 centuries of technological advancement while we build one ship," another suggested, bone plates clicking with desperate rationalism. "They must have been developing these capabilities in secret. They stole our designs," a third insisted. "It is possible they abducted our people, tortured our secrets from them. That's the only possible." "Enough!" Haruto's voice cut through their denials like a blade through smoke. He gestured to the central orb keeper, who approached with slow steps. "Establish communication with their command vessel. It's time we understood exactly what happened to us." The orbs rearranged themselves to form a communication display, their surfaces vibrating with energy. The preserved emperors in their alcove seemed to loom larger, their empty eye sockets reflecting the strange light of distant explosions. Shadows deepened as more detonations lit the sky outside. Haruto activated the central orb for transmission, his bone structure creaking with tension. "How?" The question echoed in the chamber, carrying centuries of pride and confusion. "How did you copy our ship?" The human commander's image formed in the orb, and to Haruto's surprise, they looked genuinely startled by the question. "We had 300 years to study your designs." The human commander's image formed in the orb, and to Haruto's surprise, they looked genuinely startled by the question. "We prepared for an attack on Earth or our major colonies, but no one, not one of our analysts, believed your species would actually go through with this insane plan. And then, instead of even trying to strike a meaningful blow, you attack a defenseless colony. Of all the choices you could have made, that was perhaps the worst." The chamber fell silent, except for the subtle grinding of bone plates as the truth began to sink in. The human continued, their voice carrying something almost like pity. "Your ship wasn't a secret weapon. It was a public demonstration of everything we needed to know about your technology. You spent 3 centuries showing the rest of the galaxy exactly how to defeat you. And you were so focused on building it that you forgot about us completely." "We didn't forget about you." "But the speed of the construction," someone protested from the shadows. "The precision of the copies. Do you think we spent those centuries idle?" The human's image shifted, displaying scenes of their technological evolution. "While you focused on building a single perfect vessel, we mastered the ability to understand and replicate any technology we encountered. Your ship wasn't a threat, it was a gift. A complete blueprint of your most advanced capabilities, built in the open for hundreds of years for any stealth ship or ground spy to see." Haruto's frame seemed to collapse in on itself, bone plates sagging with the weight of understanding. "The Council," he said, his voice hollow. "What do they say about us?" They suggested extinction. The human's words fell like stones in the ancient chamber. Let nature take its course and remove the stupid from the galaxy, they said. But we're choosing mercy. Your military will be destroyed, but your species will survive. And it needs to change, or else. The transmission ended, leaving the chamber in a silence broken only by the continued sounds of destruction from outside. Haruto stood motionless for a long moment, then moved with sudden purpose towards the alcoves containing their preserved emperors. In that moment, Haruto understood that their greatest mistake wasn't the ship, nor even their arrogance about human capabilities. It was this. These preserved remains. These anchors to the past that had kept them from moving forward. Every decision, every innovation, every step had been dictated by the footsteps of the dead. And where had following their plans lead them? My lord, one of his advisors started forward. What are you doing? 300 years. For this. Haruto reached the first alcove and, with movements that would have been sacrilege moments before, began removing the preserved remains of his ancestors. Bring wood, he commanded the stunned servants. Build a pyre in the chamber's center. One by one, the preserved emperors were brought down from their eternal contemplation. Generations of leaders who had guided their species down this path of war, each one adding to the weight of tradition that had finally crushed them. As the pyre grew, Haruto addressed each body he added to it. Grandpa, he said, his voice carrying a new purpose. See where your plan took us? The flames rose higher, consuming centuries of tradition. Last came his father's remains, preserved for only 9 years, but already a symbol of their stagnation. Haruto placed him gently on the pyre, then stood back to watch the flames dance. Around the room, the orbs continued, showing both destruction and mercy. Human ships methodically dismantled their military capabilities while leaving civilian infrastructure intact. When the flames began to die down, Haruto moved to each orb in turn, destroying them one by one. The ancient devices shattered under his hands, their crystalline surfaces falling like rain onto the chamber floor. Only the final orb remained, showing distant human ships departing, their task complete. Time to learn to see clearly, Haruto said, crushing the last orb in his bone-plated hands. We are not the ones on top, and perhaps we never should try to be. The chamber, now dark and empty save for the glowing embers of the pyre, felt more honest than it had in centuries. Outside, the sounds of battle had faded, replaced by the subtle grinding of bone plate as his people began to process their new reality. The eternal dark sky pressing down upon them, no longer a backdrop to their pride, but a reminder of how small they had chosen to remain. The age of following plans of dead emperors was over. Tomorrow would belong to those who could learn, change, and grow. As Haruto stood in the transformed chamber, watching the last embers fade, he felt lighter than he had in years, unburdened at last from the weight of perfect, poisonous pride.